This is the thing that I've just started to do. The reason I'm going to show it to you is partly because it's international, and partly to kind of start to take apart the differences between what scientists think they are doing when they run a trial and what it means to the people who participated in the trial. So this was a study called GenDep, Genetics of Depression. Pharmacogenetics. Pharmacogenetics is the idea that you can match somebody's DNA profile to medication so that you get better effects and less side effects. So this was a study of 2 different antidepressants, trying to match them to people's genetic profile. It was, as the lead investigator said, you must say in your paper that it was a large interdisciplinary study. And he told me to put in that it was in vitro and mouse models and all sorts. In vitro is just that you put serotonin in individual cells. They did do a human study that was a trial of the 2 antidepressant medications in 8 countries. And they wanted collaboration with service user researchers. And the reason I'm telling you about this is I think this is the toughest test. If you're collaborating with people like this, what can you do to say something sensible or say something useful? There was something called GenDep ELSI. ELSI standing for the ethical, legal, and social implications of GenDep. The funders, who were the EU, realized that pharmacogenetics was highly controversial. You know, going back to Nuremberg, do no harm, and things like that. So manipulating genetics is really controversial. So they required, the funders, the EU, required an ELSI component. So we couldn't do it all. We chose 4 out of the 8 countries to be representative of the 8 GenDep sites. And it was collaboration between us and a unit at the London School of Economics called BIOS. BIOS did focus groups with the general public and examined ethical documents. And we did focus groups with service users and interviews with participants in the human study. And I'm going to tell you about the interviews, because what I'm really interested in is what did they think they were doing? What did they think was happening? And was it properly explained to them? And did they know what they consented to? A bit like the ECT thing. And there was an economic analysis as well. So that's a research question. You know, what's the extent of correspondence between the aims of scientists and the understandings of participants in trials? We asked our participants, what do you think the purpose of the study was? We asked them, what did you consent to? And we asked them, what is your preferred treatment for depression? And we chose 4 countries, UK, Germany, Denmark, and Poland. There were 2 East European sites in GenDep, Croatia and Poland, and we wanted to have 1 East European site, so we chose Poland. We interviewed nearly 80 people. We aimed for 20 in each site. We didn't quite make it. I think we interviewed 77 in the end. The analysis was qualitative, and I'm going to give you some quotes. And all the interviewers and the people who analysed the data had experience of antidepressant medication. So to what extent did the people who participated in GenDep know what it is about and know what they consented to? Only just over a quarter were able to explain what pharmacogenetics means. Now, I realise pharmacogenetics is quite a difficult concept to grasp, but it should have been explained to them so that they were able to understand it. And then we asked, well, understanding what you consented to. Less than a third said that they had understood about risks, and there are risks to do with antidepressant medication. Just over a third said they had consented to have blood drawn for genetic purposes, but that was any genetic purpose. And out of the 70 people that we interviewed, only 11 would choose medication alone as a treatment for depression, which is a bit worrying for all the billions of pounds that's being poured into it at the moment. I'll say a bit more later. So this is what people said about the purpose of GenDep. So the first quote has got it. The first person understands it. And heredity was one thing that people said, side effects. You will find when I put up this quote that the Poland quotes are always different. And they were worried about new drugs. So they were worried about the ministry saying it was legal and all that kind of thing. And they thought it was about testing new drugs, and they didn't say anything. Nobody in Poland said anything about genetics, about pharmacogenetics. And some people just didn't care. And then, what did you consent to? At this point in the interview, the interviewer had a copy of the consent form and information sheet, and they went through it with the interviewee. So the Polish person, this is typical of the Polish transcripts, well, I knew that I consented to being included in this study, but I cannot tell I knew what it was about, and I still don't know. The next woman from the UK, she quotes a bit from the consent form that says, this is supposed to be in plain English. I agree that a sample of blood can be used to make a cell line in order to provide sufficient DNA for the genetic analysis. And she prefaces that by saying, I don't think I know what it means, but I must have agreed to it. So we asked people what their preferred treatment for depression was. And as I say, very few people said medication alone. Many people said a combination. And you can read through those, and I really like the last one. So it was a very intensive process being part of GenDep, because you talk to somebody for 2 hours every week, all about yourself. I haven't finished doing this yet, but it seems to be the case that the fact of the researchers being in the study was having a positive effect on people's mental health, regardless of the medication. Because in the quotes that I've just shown to you, the last slide, a lot of the references to talks were talks with the researchers. So there is an issue. You know, what is it that's making people feel better? Is it the medication, or is it the other side of, is it something else that's going on in the research? Wasn't true in Poland. Participants reported that being treated like guinea pigs, and the researchers were only interested in the study and not them. I don't know what kind of ethical procedures you have to go through to do research in social policy, but it's very stringent for medical research, especially research like this. It's supposed to be critical. It's supposed to preserve the autonomy and integrity of participants. Hugely problematic doing genetic research with the history of eugenics, particularly with people with a diagnosis of mental illness, and yet it seems to be the case that many researchers disregard it as a bureaucratic hurdle. The majority of participants in GenDep were not informed, and they didn't know what they'd consented to. They had a completely different view of what was going on with GenDep. In Poland, actually, there was a clear breach of protocol. In the protocol, it said that all patients should be outpatients. In Poland, of the 20 people we interviewed, 11 had taken part in the study as inpatients. 4 of those had approached a hospital and asked to be admitted because they felt so depressed. And the doctor said, I'll admit you if you agree to take part in this study. And that you should not do that. What did participants think was going on in GenDep? Not the same thing as what scientists thought. And it's very unusual for us, a study like this is very unusual, to actually ask the participants what they thought was going on. And as I say, you know, do we know, the whole thing about doing a child of medication, never mind more complex interventions, is that it has a context. And we were able to identify that context, I think because of our own experience, and say, well, are there other things about the context that might have led to people feeling better or not feeling better? For instance, if people know what the trial is about, does that make a difference? If they know what they consented to, does that make a difference? If they felt supported, does that make a difference? It's not only the biomedical intervention that counts. And anyway, only 11 people said they only wanted medication. But we are in the era in psychiatry of translational research, bench to bedside. You know, you do your genetics, you do your imaging, and you're supposed to produce bedside treatments. And I put pounds millions are spent on this, actually it's billions. So what kind of collaboration was this? Elsie was supposed to be independent of GenDep, in the sense that we did not share data. So we were not allowed access to their data, and we told the participants that anything they told us was incompetence and we would not share it with the main study. So we basically had two kinds of collaboration here. We had collaboration with the LC partner, BIOS, at the London School of Economics, and then we had collaboration with the human study investigators. The LC partner, BIOS, they reckoned this was the best done part of the study. We used user researchers with the same experience as participants. The BIOS people thought that what we did went to the heart of the ethical issues. As far as a collaboration with the gender main people goes, it wasn't great, as you can imagine. We had awful trouble getting ethics amendments. In order to do our interviews, we had to get an amendment to the ethics form. People in the UK who were at the Institute of Psychiatry were quite helpful. And they said, well, all you need to do is send this amendment to the other countries, and they can just translate it into their own language and send it to their ethics committees. But they wouldn't. And it took forever. In Poland, it took nearly 2 years to get ethical agreement to do the interviews, because they didn't want us to do it. And at the end of the day, the people in London said, look, you have to do this. But they knew we were going to uncover all this stuff, you know. And we did, they were surprised, the main study, at some of the things we found. At the moment, we're only doing it within the Institute. We've set up a service where we will help people with their information and consent forms, and it's quite well used. And it's very difficult because you cannot say, you know, your information sheet was 14 pages long and full of technical language that is inexplicable to anybody except a geneticist. This is just not good enough. You can't do that. So it's better if you make it so that people can approach you. Just create a climate where people can approach you and you can help them. And we also have at the moment something called the Service User Advisory Group, which is for a particular thing that's going on in the trust. And people from the Institute and the trust have come to the Service User Advisory Group. There are 12 people in it, and presented their projects and asked for advice on their information and consent sheets. And they do get changed quite a lot, actually. So we are trying to do something at the Institute. There has been some user involvement in NRES, and the results are going to be on the web quite soon. I do think that consent to treatment is really important. But I think consent to research, you know, it raises even more difficult issues, because then, you know, lots of the work that's done at the Institute of Psychiatry, for example, involves trials. And you're saying to people, well, we want you to partake in this study, but you might not get the intervention we're testing. You might go in the control group. So are you prepared to enter the study, even though you're not getting something that might benefit you? And I think one of the things, as well as needing to take a whole new look at how consent and information sheets are written so that they're in plain language and people can understand them, you have to flag up how important it is, not just pass it under somebody's face and say, sign here. You know, you really have to say to somebody, if you're going to take part in this study, I really want you to understand what this is about. So let's go through this together, and please ask me any questions that you have, rather than just giving it to somebody, expecting them to read it and sign on the bottom line. And I'd say that's the same for consent to treatment.